They thought they were easy targets, two black twin sisters walking alone. But when the racist gang made their move, they had no idea they had just attacked two elite special forces soldiers. What happened next left them begging for mercy. The city lights flickered in the distance as Amara and Ayana strolled down the quiet alleyway. They had just returned home after years of deployment, eager to leave behind the rigid structure of military life, even if only for a little while. Tonight was supposed to be simple, a peaceful walk after dinner, a chance to breathe without the weight of duty pressing down on them. But fate had other plans. Their steps were silent, calculated out of pure habit, their bodies naturally alert, even in a place they had once called home. They were identical in appearance, tall, athletic, their dark skin gleaming under the dim streetlights. But where Amara carried an air of controlled intensity, Ayana had a softer, more observant demeanor. To the untrained eye, they were just two young women walking through the wrong neighborhood at the wrong time. At the far end of the alley, a group of men leaned against a graffiti-stained wall, their laughter echoing off the brick buildings. 5 of them, all dressed in dark jackets, their eyes sharp and predatory. Their presence alone sent a clear message. This was their territory, and outsiders weren't welcome. One of them, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a jagged scar running down his cheek, noticed the sisters first. He nudged the man beside him, muttering something that made the others turn their heads. Their amusement turned into something darker. "Well, well," Scar muttered, stepping forward. "Look what we got here. Fancy seeing you two in a place like this." Amara and Ayana didn't react. They had seen this play out before. Men who mistook confidence for weakness, who thought their numbers meant power. It would have been almost amusing if it weren't so predictable. A smaller man with a wiry build and a crooked grin whistled. "Damn, twins. What are the odds?" His voice dripped with mockery. "Must be our lucky night." The gang's stance shifted, their bodies closing in slightly, forming a loose semicircle. It wasn't immediate aggression. It was a test, a game to see if their prey would run or fight. Most people in this situation would avoid eye contact, hurry past, pretend not to hear. But Amara and Ayana weren't most people. A young man in the group, barely older than 19, hesitated as he studied the sisters. Something was off. Their posture wasn't rigid with fear, nor were they fidgeting with nervous energy. Instead, they were unnervingly still, like panthers sizing up their surroundings. The way they held themselves, straight backs, shoulders relaxed but ready, reminded him of something dangerous. "Yo, maybe we should," he started, but Scar cut him off with a scoff. "Relax," he sneered. "They ain't gonna do shit." Ayana shifted her gaze toward him, her expression unreadable. "You sure about that?" she asked, her voice calm, almost amused. The younger gang member swallowed hard. There was something in her eyes, something cold and calculating. It sent a ripple of unease through his spine, but the others didn't seem to notice. They were still laughing, still convinced they were in control. Scar took another step forward, now standing just inches from Amara. He towered over her, his grin stretching wide as he tilted his head. "You lost, sweetheart?" he taunted. Amara met his gaze without flinching. She could smell the stale beer on his breath, see the arrogance dripping from his every move. He thought he was the predator. He had no idea he was already being measured for his fall. From the shadows, a street lamp flickered, casting long, distorted silhouettes on the alley walls. The wind rustled through scattered trash, the only sound between them now. Tension thickened, an unspoken challenge hanging in the air. The younger gang member took a step back. Something bad was about to happen. He could feel it, He just didn't know yet who would be left standing. Scar's grin widened as he reached out, a hand rough with calluses aiming to grab Amara's shoulder. It was a power move, a declaration that he was in control. But before his fingers could brush against her, Amara tilted her head slightly, just enough for his grip to miss. It was subtle, almost unnoticeable, but it sent a ripple of irritation through him. "Don't touch me," she said, her voice quiet but firm. The gang tensed. That wasn't the response they were expecting. Women in this situation usually reacted in one of two ways: fear or submission. This was neither. Scar let out a slow chuckle, shaking his head as if amused, but there was something new in his eyes, something darker. "You got a smart mouth, huh? That's cute." He turned to his crew. "Think we should teach her some respect?" Laughter erupted from the group, low and menacing. The semicircle around the sisters tightened. Amara and Ayana exchanged a glance, quick, wordless, but filled with understanding. They had been here before. Different cities, different faces, but the same poison in the air. They knew exactly how this would go if they didn't act soon. One of the gang members, a bald man with a thick chain around his neck, cracked his knuckles. "I say we make an example out of them. Show 'em whose streets these are." Scar nodded in agreement. "Yeah, let's start with the mouthy one." He lunged. It happened fast, so fast that none of them saw it coming. One moment Scar was moving forward, his hand reaching for Amara's throat. The next, he was on the ground, gasping for air, his wrist twisted at an impossible angle. Silence. The laughter stopped. The gang froze, their eyes darting between Scar's writhing body and the woman standing over him. Amara hadn't moved more than a step. The entire takedown had been one fluid motion, precise and effortless. "What the?" one of them stammered. But before he could finish, Ayana moved. The man with the chain swung at her, a wild punch meant to knock her down. She sidestepped easily, letting his own momentum throw him off balance. Her elbow came down hard against the back of his neck. He crumpled to his knees, choking on his own breath. Panic set in. The younger gang member, the one who had hesitated before, stumbled backward, his face pale. "Shit." One of the others pulled a switchblade, his hands shaking slightly. "You think you're tough, huh?" His voice was forced bravado, a last-ditch attempt to reclaim the upper hand. Ayana exhaled slowly, her expression unchanged. "You don't want to do that." "Like hell I don't." He lunged, the blade flashing under the dim streetlights. But Ayana didn't dodge. She stepped in, close, too close for the knife to be effective. Her hand caught his wrist mid-swing, twisting with an expert flick. The knife clattered to the ground. In the same motion, her foot hooked around his ankle, sweeping his legs out from under him. He hit the pavement hard, his head bouncing against the concrete. The rest of the gang hesitated now. Their cocky expressions had vanished, replaced by something bordering on fear. Scar, still on the ground, groaned in pain. "What the hell are you?" he spat, clutching his dislocated wrist. Amara crouched beside him, her voice a whisper only he could hear. "You should have walked away." He tried to push himself up, but she pressed a single finger against his chest, keeping him down with almost no effort. It wasn't just the physical pain. It was the realization that he had never been in control, not even for a second. One of the remaining gang members took a step back, hands raised. "Hey, we don't want no trouble." Ayana smirked. "That's funny. A minute ago, you were looking for trouble." The younger one, the hesitant one, was already backing toward the alley's entrance. He had seen enough. He knew when a fight was lost. "I'm out. Screw this." Scar glared at him. "Coward," he hissed. The boy didn't look back. The others shifted uneasily. The balance of power had flipped, and they knew it. Amara and Ayana didn't move, didn't chase. They didn't have to. The damage was already done, not just to their bodies, but to their pride. The gang had come looking for victims. Instead, they had stumbled into something far beyond their comprehension. The sisters exchanged another glance, a silent decision passing between them. They had made their point. There was no need to break them any further. Amara straightened, stepping away from Scar. Go. For a moment, no one moved. Then, like dominoes falling, the gang scattered. Some ran, some limped, but none dared to stay. Scar was the last to rise, his body trembling with barely restrained rage. He stared at them, as if trying to memorize every detail, as if he could somehow regain the power he had lost. But he didn't say a word. He turned and disappeared into the night. The alley was quiet again. Ayana stretched her arms, rolling her shoulders as if shaking off the encounter. Well, that was fun. Amara smirked. You're impossible. They turned and walked away, leaving only echoes of the fight behind them. The alley was supposed to be empty now. The gang had scattered, some limping, some running, all of them too afraid to stay. But something about the way Scar had looked at them before disappearing into the night didn't sit right with Amara. It wasn't just anger. It was something uglier. Humiliation. Ayana let out a long breath, rolling her shoulders as if shaking off the tension. Well, that was fun, she mused, flashing a smirk at her sister. Amara wasn't smiling. Her instincts, sharpened by years of combat, told her this wasn't over. Let's go, she said, turning toward the main street. They had barely taken 5 steps before they heard it. Footsteps, lots of them. The sisters exchanged a glance, their bodies going still. Then the alley entrance darkened as figures emerged from the shadows. More men, bigger, meaner, some holding weapons. Scar was at the front, his wrist still hanging at an awkward angle, his eyes burning with fury. And this time, he wasn't alone. You really thought you could walk away from this? Scar sneered, his voice dripping with venom. Behind him, at least 10 more men spread out, blocking every possible escape route. Some carried knives, a few had crowbars, and one in the back clutched a length of chain, swinging it menacingly. The air was thick with tension, the kind that made lesser people freeze. Ayana sighed dramatically. See, this is why men don't live long. Too much pride, not enough brains. Scar's face twisted with rage. Shut the hell up, he snapped. You think you're some kind of badass? You got lucky before. But now? Now you're screwed. Amara wasn't listening to him. She was scanning, counting, calculating. There were 12 of them in total, and while most were untrained street thugs, a few held themselves differently. Fighters. This wasn't just a gang anymore. Scar had called in favors. This was personal now. You should have left, Amara said, her voice eerily calm. Scar barked out a laugh. And let you walk away like nothing happened? Nah. See, I don't care who you think you are. You don't get to humiliate me and just walk. One of his men stepped forward, his grip tightening on a switchblade. Enough talk. And then everything exploded. The first man lunged at Ayana, blade flashing. She sidestepped smoothly, her hands moving like lightning, grabbing his wrist, twisting sharply until the knife clattered to the ground. Before he could react, she drove her elbow into his ribs, then spun, kicking his legs out from under him. He hit the pavement with a sickening thud. At the same time, 2 more rushed Amara. One swung a crowbar, the other went for a wild punch. She ducked the crowbar, then caught the punch in midair, twisting the man's arm until he let out a strangled scream. A sharp knee to the stomach sent him sprawling. The crowbar-wielding thug hesitated, just long enough for Amara to snatch the weapon from his grasp and crack it across his shin. He collapsed, howling in pain. Panic spread through the gang. This wasn't a fight. It was a massacre. Scar shouted something, but it was lost in the chaos. Ayanna ducked as a chain whizzed past her head. She grabbed it mid-air, yanking the attacker forward and slamming her forehead into his nose. Blood sprayed as he crumpled. A thick-bodied man charged at Amara, swinging wildly. She let him come, waiting for the right moment. At the last second, she pivoted, grabbing the back of his jacket and using his own momentum to slam him into the wall. He slid down, unconscious before he even hit the ground. Scar was watching in horror now. His men were dropping like flies. No, no way! He reached into his waistband, pulling out a gun. The world slowed. Ayanna saw it first, her body already moving before she even processed the thought. Scar raised the weapon, but his injured wrist slowed him. That half-second was all Amara needed. She lunged, grabbing his arm just as he pulled the trigger. The gun went off, the shot deafening in the enclosed space. The bullet buried itself in the brick wall behind them. Amara twisted his wrist, the same one she had already injured, and this time, the snap was loud. Scar screamed, the gun slipping from his fingers. Ayanna caught it before it hit the ground. Silence fell over the alley. The remaining men, the ones still conscious, stood frozen, their eyes darting between the sisters and Scar, who was now on his knees, clutching his mangled wrist. Ayanna inspected the gun, then casually ejected the magazine, tossing both pieces to the ground. Seriously? You brought a gun? That's cute. Scar's breath was ragged, his face twisted in agony. He tried to speak, but no words came. Amara crouched in front of him, her voice quiet. You should have walked away. Scar flinched. Ayanna stepped up beside her. Now run. For the first time that night, Scar hesitated. Then, like a dam breaking, he turned and bolted. The remaining gang members followed, scrambling to escape the alley like rats fleeing a sinking ship. The fight was over. Amara and Ayanna stood in the aftermath, surrounded by bodies groaning in pain. The city lights flickered overhead, casting long shadows on the broken pavement. Well, Ayanna said, stretching her arms, I think that went well. Amara rolled her eyes, but couldn't help the small smirk that tugged at her lips. Let's go home, she said. And just like that, they disappeared into the night, leaving nothing behind but the ghosts of a fight no one would ever forget. Scar's breath was ragged as he stumbled through the alley, his broken wrist clutched against his chest. The once mighty gang leader, who only minutes ago had laughed in their faces, was now barely able to keep himself upright. His men, those who could still stand, were fleeing, their footsteps echoing through the empty streets. Amara and Ayanna didn't chase them. They didn't need to. The message had been sent loud and clear. Scar tripped, catching himself against a dumpster, his body shaking with adrenaline and pain. He turned, eyes darting between the sisters who still stood in the dim light, their silhouettes unwavering. His pride told him to fight, but his instincts screamed at him to run. You still here? Ayanna mused, tilting her head. Her voice was light, playful even, but there was no mistaking the threat beneath it. Scar bared his teeth. This ain't over, he spat, though his voice wavered. You think you're untouchable? You think this means anything? Amara stepped forward, her presence alone enough to make him flinch. No, she said simply. But you know what does? Before he could react, she moved. 1 second, she was several feet away. The next, she was right in front of him, her hand gripping the front of his jacket. With one effortless motion, She slammed him back against the dumpster, knocking the breath from his lungs. "What?" he gasped. But she wasn't done. She leaned in, her voice barely above a whisper. "Your power comes from fear, from people thinking you're stronger than them. But after tonight?" She let the words sink in, watching as realization dawned in his wide, panicked eyes. "No one's going to fear you anymore." Scar swallowed hard. He knew she was right. His gang had watched him fall. His men had run. Even if he survived this night, he would never be the same. Ayanna crouched beside him, resting her elbows on her knees. "You picked the wrong target, Scar." She gave him a slow, amused smile. "And now you have to live with it." Scar's fingers twitched as if he wanted to grab something, anything, to fight back. But there was nothing left to hold on to. Amara released him, and he collapsed to the ground, barely able to keep himself upright. The alley was silent except for the distant hum of the city. The air smelled of sweat, blood, and the lingering scent of defeat. Scar's lips parted, as if he wanted to say something, to throw out one last threat, one last insult. But nothing came. There was nothing left to say. Amara turned away first, her posture relaxed, as if none of this had ever been a real challenge. Ayanna followed, sparing him one last glance. "Get out of here," she said simply, "before we change our minds." Scar didn't need to be told twice. He staggered to his feet and ran. The night swallowed Scar as he disappeared, his footsteps uneven, his breath ragged with pain and humiliation. His gang was gone, scattered like leaves in the wind, too ashamed to look back, too broken to even think about revenge. The streets, once filled with their laughter and arrogance, were now eerily silent. Amara and Ayanna stood amidst the wreckage, their bodies relaxed, their breathing steady. It wasn't the first time they had been outnumbered, and it wouldn't be the last. But this was different. This wasn't a battlefield. This was home, or at least it used to be. A faint buzzing sound broke the silence. Ayanna pulled out her phone, glancing at the screen before smirking. "News travels fast," she murmured, turning the device toward Amara. A message blinked on the screen. "What the hell did you two do? Scar's done. His whole crew is scattering. You just flipped the whole street upside down." Amara sighed, tucking her hands into her jacket pockets. "We didn't do anything they didn't bring on themselves." Ayanna chuckled, locking her phone. "Still, I'd say we made an impression." They turned, walking out of the alley without a single glance back. The city lights ahead flickered, neon signs reflecting in puddles, left by the afternoon rain. The world outside had no idea what had just happened in that dark corner of the city. As they stepped onto the main road, a police car cruised past, the officer inside barely giving them a glance. Maybe he had heard the commotion, maybe he hadn't. Or maybe, just maybe, he knew exactly what had happened, but had no intention of intervening. Some fights didn't need official reports. Some battles were won in the silence afterward. Ayanna stretched her arms over her head, letting out a satisfied sigh. "So, late-night snack?" Amara shook her head, but smiled. "You just took down a whole gang, and you're thinking about food?" "Gotta keep my energy up." Ayanna shrugged. "Besides, we're still on leave. Might as well enjoy it." With that, they vanished into the night, their footsteps light, their presence lingering only in the memories of those who had dared to cross them. The city was still alive with distant sirens, flashing billboards, and the hum of late-night traffic. But in that alley, where fear had once ruled, silence reigned. Scar was gone, his power shattered, his reputation reduced to nothing more than a cautionary tale. Amara and Ayanna walked side by side, their pace unhurried, their expressions unreadable. They had fought countless battles, faced enemies far more dangerous, but somehow, this night felt different. Maybe because it wasn't about survival. Maybe because, for once, they had fought not for duty, but for themselves. As they crossed the street, Ayana exhaled dramatically. You know, we really should stop ruining people's lives like this. Amara smirked. Or they could just stop making bad decisions. Ayana chuckled. True, but still, I almost feel bad for them. Her sister gave her a sideways glance. Almost? Ayana grinned. Almost. They disappeared into the night, leaving behind only the echoes of a lesson well taught. Never mistake silence for weakness. Never assume you understand someone just by looking at them. And most importantly, never start a fight you can't finish. Now, what do you think? Did Scar get what he deserved? Should the sisters have let them off easier, or did they go too easy on them? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you love stories where the underestimated fight back, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We've got plenty more where this came from. See you in the next one.